I never thought I'd read my own obituary. Printed in cold black ink inside a funeral program, just like a ghost I never expected to become. The list of names, the dates, the words meant for people sitting in pews who thought I was gone. But there I was, alive, sitting quietly in the back row of a tiny Brooklyn church, hiding behind my worn shawl. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar to you, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been living in a cramped apartment on the 4th floor of a rundown building in Brooklyn, where the stairs creak under your weight and the radiator coughs like an old man with bronchitis. Every morning, I shuffle to the window in my faded blue bathrobe, the one my late husband Walter bought me for Christmas 15 years ago, and I watch the world move on without me. The honks of yellow cabs echo up from the street below, mixing with the distant sounds of street vendors calling out in languages I don't understand. The smell of hot dogs and roasted nuts drifts through my cracked window, reminding me of better days when Walter and I would walk hand in hand through Central Park, sharing a pretzel and planning our retirement dreams. But that afternoon in September, everything changed. I was sorting through my mail, mostly bills and advertisements, when my arthritic fingers touched something different. A small folded piece of cream-colored paper, heavier than regular mail. My address was written in careful handwriting, but there was no return address. I unfolded it slowly, my reading glasses perched on the edge of my nose. It was a funeral program, the kind they hand out at memorial services, with a cross emblazoned on the front and a list of hymns inside. But as my eyes scanned the page, my heart stopped beating. There, in elegant script, was my own name, Margaret Eleanor Thompson, born March 15th, 1951, died peacefully in her sleep, September 10th, surrounded by loving family. The paper trembled in my hands. My mind flooded with memories. Old photographs lined up on my windowsill showing Walter and me on our wedding day, the smell of his cologne still clinging to his favorite sweater that I kept folded in my drawer, the sound of jazz records spinning on our old turntable when we were young and hopeful. But I wasn't dead. I was very much alive, sitting in my kitchen chair, feeling my pulse racing and my breath coming in short gasps. Someone had prepared for my death. Someone had written my obituary. Someone had printed programs announcing my passing to a room full of mourners, and I had never been informed of my own funeral. The address on the program was for St. Mary's Catholic Church on Atlantic Avenue, just 12 blocks from my apartment. The service was scheduled for 2 o'clock that very afternoon. I glanced at the clock on my microwave. It was already 1:15. I should have called the church. I should have called my children. I should have demanded an explanation. But something deeper than curiosity pulled me toward that little church. I needed to see who would come to mourn Margaret Thompson. I needed to understand who thought I was dead and why. I wrapped my gray wool shawl around my shoulders, the one my daughter Marie had given me 3 birthdays ago before the phone calls stopped coming. I slipped into my black dress shoes, the ones that pinched my feet but made me feel dignified, and I walked those 12 blocks through the Brooklyn streets I knew by heart. The church was smaller than I remembered, with worn stone steps and stained glass windows that caught the afternoon light. A handful of people were already filing inside, dressed in conservative black and navy blue. I recognized none of them. I took a seat in the very last pew, pulling my shawl over my silver hair and keeping my eyes down. The organ played softly as more people arrived. My heart pounded so hard I was certain everyone could hear it echoing off the vaulted ceiling. That's when I saw them. Marie, my daughter, walking down the aisle in a black dress I'd never seen before, her arm linked with her husband Robert. Behind them came my son David, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was too tight around his middle, followed by his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage children, my grandchildren who barely knew my name. They took seats in the front row, the place reserved for immediate family, the place where I should have been sitting, if I were actually dead. But I wasn't dead. I was watching my own funeral from the back of the church, invisible and forgotten, while my children prepared to bury a mother who was still breathing. You see, this wasn't the first time my family had treated me like I didn't exist. For years, I had been disappearing from their lives one phone call at a time, one missed birthday at a time, one excuse at a time. They had been practicing for my death long before they scheduled my funeral. It started after Walter passed away 7 years ago. That's when everything changed. That's when I went from being a beloved wife and mother to being what my family saw as a burden, an obligation, a problem that needed to be managed rather than a person who needed to be loved. The funeral service began, and I listened as a priest who had never met me spoke about my life. He read from notes, clearly provided by my children, describing a woman who lived to serve her family, who found joy in cooking and cleaning, who never complained about her lot in life. None of it was true. Or rather, none of it was the whole truth. They hadn't mentioned my dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams I set aside when Marie was born. They didn't talk about the poetry I wrote in secret, filling notebook after notebook with verses about love and loss and longing. They didn't mention the way I taught myself to invest in the stock market after Walter died, turning his small life insurance policy into a modest fortune that helped pay for David's college education and Marie's wedding. They spoke about me like I was a supporting character in their lives, not the author of my own story. As I sat in that back pew, memories washed over me like waves against a drowning ship. I remembered all the ways I had given pieces of myself away, year after year, until there was almost nothing left. After Walter's funeral, the requests started small. Marie would call, her voice strained with worry, asking if I could help with the mortgage payment. Just this once, she promised. Just until Robert found a better job. I had transferred $2,000 from my savings account, money I had earmarked for fixing my apartment's leaky roof. The roof never got fixed. The requests kept coming. David needed money for his son's baseball equipment. Jennifer wanted help with their vacation fund. Marie's car broke down and needed expensive repairs. Each time they promised it was temporary. Each time I found myself walking to the bank, withdrawing funds from accounts that grew smaller each month. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way they asked for it, like I owed them something for the privilege of being their mother. Like my worth could be measured in dollars and cents. "Mom, you don't need all that money anyway," Marie had said during one particularly painful phone call. "What are you saving it for? You don't go anywhere or do anything." Her words cut deeper than any knife, because she was right, in a way. I had stopped going places. I had stopped doing things. I had slowly shrunk my world down to the size of my small apartment, where I wouldn't be a bother to anyone. The phone calls became less frequent after each financial request. When I would call Marie, she'd sound distracted, always rushing to get off the line. "I'm busy, Mom. The kids have practice. I'll call you back later." But later never came. David was even worse. Our conversations became nothing but complaints about my health, my loneliness, my need for connection. "Mom, you're always so negative," he'd say. "Can't you just try to be happy? We have our own problems to deal with." My own problems. As if needing my children's love and attention was just another problem on their endless list of responsibilities. The holidays became exercises in exclusion. Thanksgiving dinner became a casual text. Having a quiet dinner this year? Just the immediate family. I wasn't immediate family anymore, apparently. Christmas became a gift card mailed without a note, an obligation fulfilled without affection. My birthdays passed unacknowledged. When I mentioned this to Marie, she sighed heavily into the phone. "Oh, Mom, you know we love you. We're just so busy. Besides, birthdays aren't that important at your age, are they?" At my age. As if reaching 70 meant I no longer deserved celebration, recognition, or joy. I started marking my own birthdays by looking through photo albums, remembering times when I mattered to people. When Walter would surprise me with flowers and dinner at our favorite restaurant. When Marie and David were small and would make me handmade cards with crayon drawings and misspelled words of love. Those cards were still tucked in my jewelry box, faded and precious. But the people who made them seemed to have forgotten that love was supposed to grow stronger over time, not weaker. The isolation crept in slowly, like fog rolling in from the harbor. Weeks would pass between phone calls. When I tried to visit, there was always a reason why it wasn't a good time. David's family was always too busy with soccer practices and school events. Marie was dealing with work stress and couldn't handle visitors. I started to wonder if I was imagining things. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just how adult children behaved. Maybe I was asking for too much. But then came the moment that changed everything. I had been feeling sick for 3 days. Not terribly sick, but enough to worry about. A persistent cough, some chest pain, difficulty catching my breath. At my age, these things can be serious. I called Marie first. "Mom, I can't talk right now. Take some cough medicine and see how you feel tomorrow." I called David next. His response was even worse. "Mom, you always think you're dying. Remember last month when you were convinced you had a heart attack and it was just heartburn? Just rest and you'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. The chest pain got worse. I ended up taking a taxi to the emergency room by myself, sitting in the waiting area for 6 hours before a doctor finally saw me. It turned out I had pneumonia. At 73, pneumonia could have killed me. I spent 4 days in the hospital. I called both of my children from my hospital bed, thinking surely they would come when they knew I was truly sick. Marie said she would try to stop by if she could get away from work. She never came. David said hospitals made him nervous, and he was sure I was getting excellent care from the doctors. I was discharged on a Thursday afternoon with instructions to rest and take antibiotics. The taxi ride home felt like the longest journey of my life. I climbed those 4 flights of stairs slowly, breathing heavily, clutching the railing with each step. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in my kitchen chair and cried, not because I had been sick, not because I had been alone in the hospital, but because I finally understood that my children saw me as a burden they were trying to manage, not a mother they were trying to love. The funeral program in my hands that September afternoon was just the final confirmation of what I had been slowly realizing. They had been burying me for years, one neglected phone call at a time, one ignored birthday at a time, one dismissed illness at a time. But now they were making it official. As the priest continued his eulogy, describing my imaginary peaceful death surrounded by loving family, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the front pew, Marie was quietly wiping away tears. Real tears. She was genuinely grieving for me, which meant she truly believed I was dead. David sat with his arm around Jennifer, his face somber and respectful. My grandchildren looked appropriately sad, staring down at their hands folded in their laps. None of them looked guilty or uncomfortable. They weren't pretending to grieve. They were actually grieving. Someone had convinced my family that I was dead. Someone had arranged this funeral, written my obituary, and notified my children of my passing. But who? And why? The answer came during the final hymn, when I saw a familiar figure slip into the church through a side door. Mrs. Henderson, my building superintendent's wife, wearing a dark coat and a satisfied expression. She took a seat near the middle of the church and bowed her head in what looked like prayer, but felt more like triumph. Mrs. Henderson, who had been asking about my rent payments, who had mentioned several times that she knew people interested in my apartment, who had been pressuring me to consider moving somewhere more suitable for someone my age. Mrs. Henderson, who had a key to my apartment and access to my mail. The pieces fell into place like dominoes in my mind. She had been intercepting my outgoing mail to my children. She had probably been telling them I was sicker than I was, more confused than I was, maybe even suggesting that I was losing my memory or my ability to care for myself. When you're 73 and live alone, people are quick to assume the worst about your mental state. A few carefully planted suggestions about missed phone calls, forgotten conversations, or confusion about dates would be enough to make my children worry about my well-being. And if they were worried enough, they might be relieved to hear that I had passed peacefully in my sleep. Mrs. Henderson wanted my apartment. In a city like New York, rent-controlled apartments like mine were worth a fortune in gold. If I died, she could charge market rate to the next tenant. She could probably triple the rent overnight. But I wasn't dead, and I wasn't moving. The service ended with a final prayer, and people began filing out of the church. I stayed seated, hidden in my back pew, watching my family shake hands with well-wishers and accept condolences for their loss. They looked genuinely sad, genuinely bereft, which made their neglect of me while I was alive even more painful. I waited until the church was nearly empty before standing up. My knees creaked, my back ached, and my heart felt like it might burst from the weight of everything I had witnessed. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing off the stone floor. Marie was standing near the altar, talking quietly with the priest. She looked up as I approached, and I watched her face transform from polite sadness to confusion, to shock, to something approaching terror. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The priest looked between us, clearly confused. David, who had been arranging flowers near the casket, an empty casket, I realized, turned at the sound of Marie's voice. When he saw me, he stumbled backward, knocking over a arrangement of white lilies. "Margaret?" the priest asked, consulting his notes. "But we just held your funeral service." I looked at my children, these people I had given my heart and soul to raise, who had been mourning my death while ignoring my life. I looked at the empty casket that was meant to hold my body, at the flowers that were meant to honor my memory, at the program that reduced my entire existence to a few paragraphs of generic praise. "I'm not dead," I said quietly. And then, louder, "I'm not dead." The words echoed off the church walls like a declaration of war. Marie started crying, but these weren't tears of joy at seeing me alive. These were tears of embarrassment, confusion, maybe even disappointment. "Mom, what are you doing here? How did you—" "Mrs. Henderson said you had passed away in your sleep 3 days ago." "Mrs. Henderson lied," I said simply. David was staring at me like I was actually a ghost, someone who had returned from the dead to haunt him. "We planned this whole service. We took time off work. The kids missed school. We ordered flowers. We paid for the church. You paid for my funeral," I corrected him, "but you couldn't be bothered to pay for my life." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. Finally, someone had struck the match. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marie asked, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew exactly what it meant. When was the last time you called me? I asked her. Not to ask for money, not to complain about your problems, just to see how I was doing. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. When was the last time you visited me? I asked David. When was the last time you invited me for dinner? When was the last time you included me in your family plans? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. You've been treating me like I was dead for years, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. The only difference is that today, you made it official. The priest cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps this is a conversation better held in private, he suggested. I wasn't done. I had been silent for too long, invisible for too long, forgotten for too long. I was going to speak my truth in this church, this place meant for confession and redemption. Do you know what it's like? I asked my children. To give birth to two people, to raise them with every ounce of love in your heart, to sacrifice your dreams and your money and your time to help them build their lives, only to be discarded when they no longer need you? Marie was crying harder now. Mom, that's not fair. We love you. No, I said, shaking my head. You loved my money. You loved my willingness to solve your problems. You loved having someone to blame when your lives didn't go according to plan. But you didn't love me. If you loved me, you would have known I wasn't dead. The truth of those words hit me as I spoke them. A mother who is truly loved doesn't die unnoticed. A mother who is truly cherished doesn't spend days in the hospital alone. A mother who is truly valued doesn't have to beg for phone calls and visits. The church had grown quiet except for the sound of Marie's crying and the distant traffic from outside. David finally found his voice. Mom, we're sorry. We didn't mean for things to get this bad. We've just been so busy with our own lives, and we thought you were doing okay on your own. I wasn't doing okay, I told him. I was dying a little bit every day. And you didn't notice because you weren't looking. I turned to leave, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. Breaking because I had to face the reality that my children didn't love me the way I had loved them. Healing because I was finally telling the truth about my pain instead of swallowing it in silence. Where are you going? Marie called after me. Home, I said without turning around. To my apartment that Mrs. Henderson tried to steal by convincing you I was dead. To my life that you all seem to think ended years ago. I walked out of that church with my head held high for the first time in years. The September air was crisp and clean, and the Brooklyn streets looked different somehow. Brighter, more full of possibility. But my story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. That night, I sat in my kitchen chair and made a list. Not a list of grievances, though I had plenty of those. Not a list of things I wanted to say to my children, though I had years of unspoken words building up inside me like pressure in a kettle. I made a list of things I wanted to do with whatever time I had left. Real things. Things that would bring me joy instead of just marking time until I died. I wanted to take an art class. I had always been good at drawing, but I had given up my sketchbooks when Marie was born. I wanted to travel somewhere I had never been. Walter and I had always talked about going to Paris, but we kept putting it off until it was too late. I wanted to learn to use a computer so I could connect with other people who might understand what it was like to be invisible in your own family. I wanted to stop being afraid of being alone and start enjoying my own company. Most of all, I wanted to stop defining my worth by how much my children needed me and start defining it by how much I needed myself. The next morning, Marie called. Her voice was small and hesitant, like a child who knows she's in trouble but isn't sure exactly what she did wrong. Mom, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Yes, I agreed. We do. Can we come over tonight? David and I want to explain everything. I almost said yes. For 73 years, I had been saying yes to my children's requests, yes to their demands, yes to their expectations. Yes was my default setting, the word that came automatically whenever they needed something from me. But this time, I paused. I thought about what I actually wanted, not what they wanted from me. No, I said, and the word felt strange in my mouth. I'm not ready to see you yet. There was silence on the other end of the line. Marie had never heard me say no to her before. But Mom, we need to straighten this out. We need to understand what happened. What happened, I said carefully, is that you buried me while I was still alive. What happened is that you grieved for a mother you had already forgotten. What happened is that you realized you lost something only after you thought it was gone forever. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. When was the last time you called me just to say hello? I asked her again. Not to ask for money, not to complain about Robert or the kids or your job, just to hear my voice because you missed me. The silence stretched between us like an ocean. I can't remember, she finally admitted. Neither can I told her. And that's the problem. I hung up the phone and immediately felt guilty. I had never hung up on one of my children before. I had been raised to believe that mothers don't hang up on their children, that mothers are always available, always understanding, always forgiving. But I was tired of being always available for people who were never available for me. David called an hour later. His approach was different from Marie's. Instead of apologizing, he went on the attack. "Mom, what you did yesterday was cruel. Do you have any idea how embarrassed we were? How confusing this is for the kids? They don't understand why Grandma was at her own funeral. Your children don't know me well enough to be confused by much of anything," I replied. "When was the last time you brought them to visit me? You know how busy we are with their schedules, and your apartment isn't exactly kid-friendly. My apartment was good enough for you when you were growing up in it," I reminded him. That was different. We didn't have other options then. The words hit me like a physical blow. We didn't have other options then. As if loving me, spending time with me, including me in their lives was something they did only when they had no other choice. "I see," I said quietly. "Look, Mom, we can work this out. We can visit more often, call more regularly, but you have to understand that we're adults with our own responsibilities now." "I understand perfectly," I told him. "You're adults who don't need me anymore, and I'm an adult who doesn't need to be treated like an inconvenience." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Actually, David, I think that's exactly what you meant. And I think it's exactly how you've been treating me for years." I hung up on him too, twice in one day. I was becoming a rebel in my old age. The phone rang several more times that afternoon, but I didn't answer it. I was busy looking up art classes in the Queens Community Center catalog I had picked up months ago but never actually read. I was researching senior travel groups online using the library computer. I was imagining a life where I mattered to someone, even if that someone was just me. That evening, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Marie and David standing in the hallway, both looking uncomfortable and determined. I could have pretended I wasn't home. I could have hidden in my own apartment like I had been hiding from my own life for years. Instead, I opened the door. "We're not leaving until we talk this through," David announced, pushing past me into my small living room. "That's breaking and entering," I pointed out. "It's our childhood home," Marie said, following her brother inside. "We have a right to be here." "Actually, you don't," I corrected her. "This is my home. I pay the rent. I make the rules. And the first rule is that you can't barge in here making demands." They both stopped moving and stared at me. This wasn't the mother they remembered, the one who stepped aside and made room for whatever they needed. We sat in my small living room, the same room where I had rocked them to sleep as babies, helped them with homework as children, listened to their teenage problems and adult complaints. But now it felt different. Now I was sitting in my own chair in my own apartment, and they were the visitors. "Mom," Marie began, "we know we haven't been the best children lately." "Lately?" I repeated. "Marie, you haven't called me just to talk in over 2 years. You haven't invited me for dinner in 3 years. You forgot my birthday last year and the year before. This isn't about lately. This is about consistently, deliberately shutting me out of your lives." "We didn't mean to shut you out," David protested. "We just got caught up in our own stuff." "Your own stuff," I repeated. "Your own families, your own problems, your own lives. I understand that you have priorities, David. What I don't understand is how the woman who gave birth to you, raised you, and supported you financially and emotionally for decades ended up so far down on that list of priorities that you didn't even notice I was alive." They exchanged glances, and I could see them silently arguing about who should speak first, who should take responsibility, who should try to fix this mess they had created. "We took you for granted," Marie finally admitted. "We assumed you would always be there, that you were fine on your own, that you didn't need us as much as we used to need you." "I did need you," I told her. "I needed you to remember that I exist. I needed you to care about my health, my happiness, my daily life. I needed you to treat me like a person instead of like a service that was always available when you required it." "We can change," David said quickly. "We can call more, visit more, include you in our plans." "Can you?" I asked. "Or will you do it for a few weeks until the guilt wears off and then slip back into treating me like I'm already dead?" The question hung in the air between us, because we all knew the answer. They had made promises before, after other arguments, other hurts, other realizations about how poorly they had been treating me. The promises lasted until their lives got busy again, until their attention was pulled back to their real priorities. "This time will be different," Marie insisted. "Why?" I asked. "What's different about this time?" "Because we almost lost you," she said, starting to cry again. "Because we thought you were dead, and we realized how much we love you." "You realized how much you would miss having me available when you needed something," I corrected her. "That's not the same as loving me." The words were harsh, but they were true. I could see the truth of them in their faces, in the way they couldn't quite meet my eyes, in the way they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "What do you want from us?" David asked, and for the first time he sounded genuinely curious rather than defensive. It was a good question. What did I want from them? For years I had wanted their time, their attention, their inclusion in their lives. I had wanted to feel valued and loved and needed. I had wanted to matter. But sitting there in my living room, looking at these two people who had caused me so much pain, I realized that my wants had changed. "I want you to respect me," I said slowly, thinking through each word. "I want you to treat me like an adult who has her own thoughts and feelings and needs, not like a convenience store that's open 24 hours for whatever you might need." "We do respect you," Marie protested. "No, you don't," I said firmly. "If you respected me, you would have asked before giving Mrs. Henderson a key to my apartment so she could check on me. If you respected me, you wouldn't have believed her when she told you I was dead without bothering to verify it with doctors or hospitals or anyone else. If you respected me, you wouldn't have planned my funeral without once trying to call my phone to see if I answered." They both looked shocked. They hadn't realized I knew about the key, about Mrs. Henderson, about how easily they had been manipulated into believing I was dead. "Mrs. Henderson told us you had been confused lately," David explained. "She said you had been forgetting to pay bills, forgetting appointments, asking the same questions over and over. She was worried about you living alone." "When was the last time either of you spent enough time with me to know whether I was confused or not?" I asked. Another long silence. "She said she found you," Marie whispered. "In your bed, peaceful, like you had just gone to sleep. She called us right after she called the police." "She lied," I said simply. "She wanted my apartment. Rent-controlled apartments in this neighborhood are worth a fortune. If I died, she could charge market rate to the next tenant. If I moved to a nursing home or assisted living, same result." I watched their faces as they processed this information. I could see the moment when they realized how easily they had been deceived, how readily they had believed the worst about my mental state without bothering to check for themselves. "We should have known better," David said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "You should have. But you didn't, because you didn't know me well enough to know better. You didn't know that I balance my checkbook to the penny every month. You didn't know that I keep a careful calendar of all my appointments. You didn't know that I can tell you exactly how much money I have in each of my accounts and exactly what I spend it on." "Tell us now," Marie said suddenly. "Tell us about your life. Tell us what we've been missing." I almost laughed. After years of trying to get their attention, after years of attempting to share my daily experiences with people who were too busy to listen, they wanted me to perform my life for them on command. "It doesn't work that way," I told them. "You can't catch up on 7 years of neglect in one conversation. You can't suddenly decide you want to know me and expect me to pour out my heart like nothing happened." "Then what can we do?" David asked, and for the first time in years, he sounded like my little boy again, lost and confused and genuinely wanting to make things better. "You can start by understanding that I'm not your mother anymore," I said, and watched their faces register shock. "I mean, I'm biologically your mother. I always will be. But I'm no longer willing to be the person who exists solely to meet your needs. I'm no longer willing to be the supporting character in your lives. I'm no longer willing to be treated like a resource instead of a person." "What does that mean, practically?" Marie asked. "It means no more emergency loans that never get paid back. It means no more guilt trips about how hard your lives are. It means no more expecting me to be available whenever you decide you need me, after weeks or months of not bothering to call." I stood up from my chair, suddenly feeling stronger than I had in years. "It means that if you want a relationship with me, you're going to have to build one based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Not obligation, not guilt, not convenience." "And if we can't do that?" David asked quietly. I looked at these two people I had loved more than my own life, who had broken my heart so thoroughly that I was still finding pieces of it scattered around my soul. "Then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices," I told them, "just like I've been living with the consequences of mine." They left shortly after that, promising to think about what I had said, promising to try harder, promising to be better children. But I had heard those promises before, and I no longer placed much faith in them. What I did have faith in was my own ability to build a life that didn't depend on their approval or inclusion. The next morning, I walked to the Queens Community Center and signed up for a beginner's art class that met twice a week. The instructor was a woman about my age named Helen who had kind eyes and paint under her fingernails. When I told her I hadn't drawn anything in 40 years, she smiled and said, "Then you're in for a wonderful surprise. Your hands remember more than your mind realizes. I also signed up for a seniors computer class so I could learn to use the internet properly, maybe even join online communities for people who shared my interests. The instructor was a patient young man who didn't make me feel stupid when I asked basic questions about email and web browsers. On my way home, I stopped at the travel agency I had walked past hundreds of times without ever going inside. The agent, a cheerful woman with orange-dyed hair and a thick Brooklyn accent, showed me brochures for senior travel groups. Paris was expensive, she warned me, but there were payment plans, and the October tours were discounted because it was off-season. I took the brochures home and spread them across my kitchen table like treasure maps. For the first time in years, I had things to look forward to that had nothing to do with my children's needs or problems. I had plans that existed entirely for my own pleasure and fulfillment. It felt revolutionary. Marie called me 3 days later, her voice cautious but warm. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about building a real relationship instead of just calling when I need something. I was wondering if you'd like to go to lunch this Saturday. Just us. No agenda, no favors to ask. Just lunch." I paused before answering, considering my own feelings instead of automatically saying yes. "I would like that," I told her, surprising both of us. "But I should tell you that I have art class until noon, so it would have to be after that." "Art class?" she asked, and I could hear genuine interest in her voice. "Since when do you take art class?" "Since this week," I said. "I'm rediscovering some things about myself that I had forgotten." We made plans for lunch at a small cafe in Queens, somewhere neutral where we could talk without the weight of family history pressing down on every conversation. Saturday turned out to be one of those perfect autumn days that New York does so well, with crisp air and golden light filtering through the changing leaves. My art class was working on self-portraits, and Helen encouraged us to draw not just our faces, but something that represented who we were becoming. I drew myself sitting by my window, but instead of looking out at the street with loneliness, I was looking out with curiosity. In my drawing hands, I held a paintbrush and a passport. "That's beautiful, Margaret," Helen said, looking over my shoulder. You can see the hope in her eyes. Hope. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. For the first time in years, I was hopeful about my future, instead of just resigned to it. Lunch with Marie was awkward at first. We had gotten out of the habit of talking to each other rather than at each other. She asked about my art class, and I found myself talking animatedly about color theory and shading techniques. She seemed genuinely interested, asking questions that suggested she was actually listening instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. "I never knew you were interested in art," she admitted. "I never told you," I replied. "You never asked." It wasn't said cruelly, just as a statement of fact. And to her credit, she didn't get defensive. "What else don't I know about you?" she asked. The question opened a door that had been closed for so long I had almost forgotten it existed. I told her about my poetry notebooks, about my small investments in the stock market, about my dreams of traveling. I told her about the loneliness that had been eating me alive, about the nights I spent talking to her father's photograph, because I had no one else to share my thoughts with. She cried a little and apologized a lot and promised to do better. But more importantly, she listened, really listened, like I was a person worth listening to. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we were finishing our sandwiches. "Of course. Why didn't you ever remarry? Dad's been gone for 7 years. You're still an attractive woman. You could have found someone." It was a question I had asked myself many times, especially during the loneliest moments of the past few years. "I suppose I was waiting for my children to need me less so I could focus on my own needs more," I told her honestly. "But that time never came. You just kept needing different things." And then I realized I was 73 and had spent so many years being available for everyone else that I had forgotten how to be available for myself. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I thought about it carefully before answering. "I regret the balance," I said finally. "I don't regret loving you and David or helping you when you needed it, but I regret losing myself in the process. I regret becoming so focused on being the mother you needed that I stopped being the woman I wanted to be." We hugged goodbye outside the restaurant, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. Not obligatory, not guilty, not rushed. Just two people who cared about each other sharing a moment of connection. But I knew that one lunch didn't fix everything. Relationships, I was learning, weren't like broken appliances that could be repaired with a single visit from a technician. They were like gardens that required consistent attention and care to thrive. David was slower to come around. His pride was hurt, and he seemed to interpret my newfound independence as a personal rejection. When he finally called, 2 weeks after our confrontation in my apartment, his tone was still defensive. "Mom, I know you're angry with us, but don't you think you're being a little dramatic? Making us worry that we had lost you just to prove a point?" "I didn't make you do anything," I corrected him. I attended my own funeral because I was curious about who would come to mourn me. I stayed in the back because I didn't want to disrupt your grief. I only revealed myself when I realized that you actually believed I was dead. Well, how were we supposed to know you were alive when Mrs. Henderson told us you had died? You were supposed to know because you were supposed to be in regular enough contact with me to know whether I was alive or dead, I said, no longer willing to accept his excuses. That's not fair. We can't call you every day. I never asked you to call me every day, David. I asked you to call me at all. I asked you to remember that I exist when you're not actively needing something from me. The conversation went in circles for a while, with him making excuses and me refusing to accept them. Finally, I said something that seemed to break through his defensiveness. David, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry because you didn't call me every day. I'm angry because you were willing to believe I was dead without bothering to verify it. I'm angry because my death was more believable to you than my independence would have been. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? He finally asked. I mean that when Mrs. Henderson told you I was confused and helpless and declining rapidly, you believed her without question. When she told you I had died peacefully in my sleep, you planned my funeral without ever wondering if maybe you should check with a hospital or a doctor, or even just try calling my phone to see if I answered. We were in shock, he protested. You were in shock, or you were relieved? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire neither of us wanted to acknowledge. That's a terrible thing to say, he whispered. It's a terrible thing to wonder about your own children, I replied. But I do wonder, David. I wonder if some part of you was relieved to hear that your obligation to your difficult, needy, aging mother was finally over. He was crying now. I could hear it in his voice when he spoke. Mom, that's not true. We love you. We would never want you to die. I believe that you love me, I told him gently. But I also think you love the idea of me more than you love the reality of me. You love having a mother who's proud of you, who thinks you're wonderful, who's always there when you need her. You're less comfortable with a mother who has her own problems, her own needs, her own opinions that might not always align with yours. Isn't that what families do? He asked. Support each other? Yes, I agreed. But support should go both ways. For years, I supported you financially and emotionally. But when I needed support, when I was lonely or sick or struggling, you were too busy to provide it. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I was saying. I want to do better, he said finally, but I don't know how. I don't know how to start over with my own mother. Start by getting to know me, I suggested. Not the person you remember from your childhood, not the person you need me to be, but the person I am now. Start by asking me questions about my life and actually listening to the answers. Okay, he said quietly. I can do that. And David? Start by understanding that I'm not just your mother anymore. I'm a 73-year-old woman trying to figure out what she wants to do with the rest of her life. I'm a person with interests and dreams and plans that have nothing to do with you or Marie or your children. I need you to be okay with that. I'm trying to be okay with it, he admitted. Try harder, I told him, but I said it with love. We began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on new terms. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and misunderstandings. There were moments when he slipped back into treating me like his personal bank account, and moments when I slipped back into enabling his dependency. But gradually, something shifted. Instead of calling me only when he needed money or a babysitter, David started calling sometimes just to tell me about his day. Instead of seeing me as a resource to be managed, he began to see me as a person with her own experiences worth sharing. Marie made even more progress. She started including me in her social media posts, sharing photos of our lunch dates and art show visits. She began asking for my advice not because she was in crisis, but because she was genuinely curious about my perspective on things. More importantly, she stopped asking me for money, not because she didn't need it sometimes, but because she began to understand that our relationship shouldn't be transactional. I want you to know that I love you for who you are, not for what you can give me, she told me one afternoon as we were walking through Prospect Park, looking at the fall foliage. I'm still learning to believe that, I admitted. I understand why it's hard to believe, she said. We didn't give you much evidence of it for a while there. A while. 7 years was more than a while, but I appreciated her honesty about our recent past. The holidays that year were different. Instead of being excluded from their celebrations, I was invited to participate. But more importantly, I was also invited to host my own celebrations. Marie and David both came to my apartment for Christmas Eve dinner, bringing their families and contributing to the meal instead of expecting me to do all the work. My granddaughter Emma, who was 16 and had barely spoken to me in years, surprised me by asking if she could see some of my artwork. Grandma, I didn't know you were an artist, she said, flipping through my sketchbook. I'm learning to be one, I corrected her. At my age, I'm still figuring out who I am. That's so cool, she said, and seemed to mean it. I wish I was brave enough to try new things. You're 16, I told her. Everything is new to you. The brave thing at your age is deciding what kind of person you want to become. We spent the evening talking about art and school and her hopes for college. It was the longest conversation I'd ever had with any of my grandchildren, and it reminded me of all the relationships I had missed out on, while I was focused on trying to maintain relationships with people who didn't seem to want them. But even as my family relationships improved, I continued to build a life that didn't depend on them. I finished my art classes and enrolled in more advanced ones. I joined a book club at the library. I planned that trip to Paris for the spring, traveling with a group of other seniors who wanted to see the Louvre and eat croissants and walk along the Seine. I started dating. Not seriously, not with any intention of remarriage, but just for the pleasure of adult companionship. I met a man named Frank at my book club who had also been widowed, who also had adult children who had forgotten he existed until they needed something. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. Frank was the one who suggested I start writing down my experiences, not just for my own therapeutic benefit, but as advice for other people who might be going through similar struggles with their adult children. You have wisdom to share, he told me over dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. You figured out how to save yourself from disappearing entirely. That's not something everyone manages to do. So I started writing. First in the notebooks where I used to write poetry, then on the computer I had learned to use at the community center. I wrote about the loneliness of being taken for granted by the people you love most. I wrote about the courage it takes to demand respect from your own children. I wrote about learning to value yourself even when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally seem to value you only conditionally. I wrote about attending my own funeral and discovering that I wasn't actually dead. The writing led to speaking engagements at senior centers and community groups. Other women, and some men, would approach me afterward to share their own stories of being overlooked, undervalued, and taken advantage of by their adult children. How do you do it? They would ask. How do you set boundaries with your own kids without losing them entirely? The answer, I learned, was complex and individual. But it always started with the same fundamental shift. You have to stop defining your worth by how much other people need you, and start defining it by how much you respect yourself. You have to stop being afraid of being alone, and start being afraid of being invisible. You have to stop accepting crumbs of affection from people who should be giving you full meals of love and attention. And sometimes, you have to be willing to attend your own funeral to figure out whether anyone would actually miss you if you were gone. 2 years after that September afternoon when I sat in the back pew of St. Mary's Church, I received another unexpected piece of mail. This time, it was an invitation to Marie's promotion celebration at work. She had gotten a significant raise and a new title, and she wanted to celebrate with the people who mattered most to her. My name was at the top of the guest list. Not because she needed me to contribute money or help with arrangements, not because she felt obligated to include me, but because she genuinely wanted me there, wanted to share her success with me, wanted my presence in her moment of triumph. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I had bought for special occasions but rarely had reason to wear. I did my makeup carefully and styled my silver hair. I looked in the mirror before leaving my apartment and saw a woman who looked loved and valued and worthy of celebration. At the party, Marie introduced me to her colleagues not as my mother who helps out sometimes, but as my mother the artist who's traveling to Paris next month. She talked about my painting and my writing and my book club with genuine pride. I didn't know your mother was so accomplished, one of her coworkers said. Neither did I, Marie admitted, looking at me with something that might have been awe. I'm still discovering all the amazing things about her that I never took the time to notice before. David was there too, with his family. Instead of spending the evening focused on his phone or talking to other people, he spent time with me. He asked about my trip to Paris, wanted to see photos from my art classes, listened when I told him about the book club's current selection. Mom, he said as the evening was winding down, I need to tell you something. That day we thought you had died, sitting in that church, I realized that I knew almost nothing about your actual life, your interests, your friends, your daily routine. I realized that if someone had asked me to write your eulogy, I wouldn't have known what to say about who you really were. And now? I asked. Now I know that you're learning to paint watercolors, that you love mystery novels with female detectives, that you've been investing in cryptocurrency and making more money than most financial advisors. I know that you volunteer at the animal shelter on Thursdays and that you're taking French lessons to prepare for your trip. I was surprised that he had absorbed so many details about my current life. I've been paying attention, he said, reading my expression. Finally. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Because I almost lost the chance to know you, he said simply, and because I realized that knowing you, the real you, is a privilege I had been taking for granted. As I rode the subway home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since I sat in that church pew 2 years earlier. My children still weren't perfect. They still sometimes forgot to call, still occasionally treated me like their personal Google search engine for family history questions, still struggled to see me as an independent person rather than just their mother. But the fundamental dynamic had shifted. I was no longer invisible in their lives. I was no longer just a resource to be tapped when needed. I was no longer afraid that they would abandon me if I stopped being useful to them. Because I had learned the most important lesson of my 75 years. You teach people how to treat you. And for too many years, I had been teaching my children that I was willing to accept scraps of attention in exchange for unlimited amounts of love and support. Once I stopped accepting scraps, they were forced to offer me real meals. Once I stopped being afraid of losing them, they were forced to earn my presence in their lives. The funeral program that had shattered my world had also saved it. By showing me how easily my family could believe I was dead, it forced me to insist on being truly alive, not just breathing, not just existing, not just taking up space in the world, but alive in the fullest sense, pursuing my interests, developing my talents, forming relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection, creating a life that had meaning beyond my usefulness to other people. I still have that funeral program. I keep it in my jewelry box, next to the handmade cards my children gave me when they were small and still believed I was the most important person in their world. The program serves as a reminder that I once was so invisible to my family that they could easily believe I had died without them noticing. But it also serves as proof of how far I've traveled from that dark place, how much I've grown, how much I've learned to value myself. Sometimes visitors to my apartment notice the program and ask about it. I tell them it's a souvenirs from the most important day of my life, the day I learned that being loved is not the same as being needed, and being needed is not the same as being respect. The day I learned that it's possible to rise from the dead, even when you're still alive. Last month, I got a phone call from a woman named Patricia, who had heard me speak at a senior center in Manhattan. She was crying as she told me her story, which was so similar to mine it could have been a carbon copy. Adult children who only called when they needed money. Grandchildren who barely acknowledged her existence. Years of feeling invisible and unimportant and taken for granted. I don't know how to change things without losing them completely, she sobbed into the phone. Patricia, I told her gently, you can't lose something you don't really have. If your children only contact you when they need something, then you don't have a relationship with them. You have a business arrangement. But they're my children, she protested. I love them. I know you do. And that love is real and valuable. But love that only flows in one direction isn't a relationship. It's a donation. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I was saying. What if they choose to cut me off entirely rather than treat me better? She asked, voicing the fear that keeps so many of us trapped in unhealthy family dynamics. Then they will have shown you exactly how they really felt about you all along, I told her. And you will have the information you need to build a life that doesn't depend on people who don't value you. It's a hard truth, but it's still the truth. Sometimes the people we love most are the people who respect us least. Sometimes the relationships we're most afraid to lose are the relationships that are slowly killing our spirits. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything in order to gain yourself. Patricia called me back 3 months later. Her voice was different, stronger, more confident. She had stopped sending her son money for his emergencies. She had told her daughter that she wouldn't babysit the grandchildren unless she was asked politely in advance, not commanded at the last minute. She had joined a choir and reconnected with old friends and started planning a cruise to Alaska. I thought they would disown me, she told me, but something amazing happened instead. They started treating me like a person instead of a servant. How does it feel? I asked. Terrifying and wonderful at the same time, she laughed. I keep waiting for it to go back to the way it was before. But every day that I stick to my boundaries, I feel a little bit stronger. This is what I want other people to understand. You are not responsible for fixing other people's inability to love you properly. You are not required to accept poor treatment because it comes from people you're related to. You are not obligated to disappear so that other people can feel more comfortable. You matter, your feelings matter, your needs matter, your life matters, independent of what you can provide for other people. And if the people in your life can't accept that truth, then they're not really seeing you anyway. They're seeing a function, not a person. They're relating to a role, not a human being. I spent 73 years of my life trying to earn love by being useful. I gave away pieces of myself until I was almost completely gone. I made myself so available to other people's needs that I forgot I had needs of my own. It took attending my own funeral to realize that I was dying while I was still alive. But here's the truth that nobody tells you about hitting rock bottom. It's also the foundation from which you can build a whole new structure. When you've lost everything, including your illusions about the people you love, you have nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing left to lose, you can finally start making choices based on what you want instead of what other people expect from you. I am 75 years old now. I have silver hair and arthritis and reading glasses. I have wrinkles that map out decades of laughter and sorrow and worry and joy. I am not young, I am not naive, and I am not invisible. I paint watercolors that capture the light streaming through my apartment windows. I read mystery novels that challenge me to solve puzzles before the detective reveals the solution. I travel to places I dreamed about visiting when I was married to a man who was always too busy to take vacations. I have relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I have conversations with people who are interested in my thoughts and opinions, not just my willingness to solve their problems. I have a life that has meaning beyond my usefulness to other people. And yes, I have a relationship with my children that is healthier and more honest than anything we had before. Not because they suddenly became different people, but because I stopped accepting treatment that made me feel less than human. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fast. It wasn't without loss and grief and moments of doubt so profound I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But it was necessary. And it was worth it. Because the alternative was to keep disappearing, little by little, day by day, until there was nothing left of Margaret Eleanor Thompson except a woman who existed to meet other people's needs. The alternative was to die while I was still alive, to be buried by people who had already forgotten I mattered. I chose to live instead. I chose to matter, even if it meant mattering to myself first and most. I chose to be seen, even if it meant demanding that people actually look at me. I chose to rise from the dead, even though I had never actually died. And now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who is fully alive. Not just breathing, not just existing, not just marking time until her actual death, but living with purpose and passion and a sense of her own worth that no one can take away from her. That woman is me. She always was, even when I forgot her existence. She was just waiting for me to stop being afraid of losing other people long enough to remember that I couldn't afford to keep losing myself. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever wondered if the people you love most actually love you, or just love what you do for them? Have you ever felt like you were dying a little bit every day, not from illness, but from neglect? Tell me in the comments. Share your story. Let me know that you understand what it feels like to attend your own funeral while you're still alive. And if this story helped you see your own life a little more clearly, if it gave you permission to demand better treatment from the people who are supposed to love you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't measured by your usefulness to others, then please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Because maybe, together, we can help each other remember that we all deserve to be truly alive, not just barely breathing. We all deserve to be seen and valued and respected, especially by the people we call family. We all deserve to matter, not because of what we can give, but because of who we are. And sometimes, learning that truth requires us to sit in the back pew of our own funeral, watching the people we love grieve for someone they never really knew, until we find the courage to stand up and say, "I'm not dead. I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere until you see me, really see me, for who I am." Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me. And remember, you matter too, exactly as you are, right now, today. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, not even the people you love most, especially not the people you love most.